All right, we are live. Thanks everyone for joining. Super excited today to go through what is going to be just a ton of content with Ruth from Go today. But first, before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you do have a question, please use the chat, and you'll find it on the right-hand side of your screen. We will get to it. And I guess, without any further ado, let's get going. Before we get to intros, Ruth, do you want to share with the audience here what they can expect to learn about in the next hour?
Right. So the first slide in any Go presentation is what at the end of this webinar, you're going to be able to do some specific things. I want you to know what you're going to get out of your time with us. We're going to talk about 7 deadly challenges. We're going to give you 7 simple solutions to start addressing those challenges. First, we're going to talk about a way to prioritize the work for your director of coaching. We're going to talk about how to have better board meetings. We're going to talk about one of the ways you can communicate your players' performance and growth in the sport more clearly to parents and help make that communication better. I'm going to give you the secret I learned when I was a team manager about how to reduce and manage the workload of a team manager and a coach. We're going to talk about the secrets behind a volunteer program that's stable over time and keeps your volunteers coming back. We're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about the different types of money and the strings and expectations that come with those different types of money. And finally, I'm going to give you the secret behind every successful mediator, the question they ask that helps the conversation move forward constructively.
Awesome. So, for those of you that are wondering, Ruth is the founder of Go. That stands for Governance and Operations. Ruth, essentially, she's an organizational alchemist who has worked with some of the largest youth sports organizations in a couple things, namely organizational development and conflict mediation. Ruth is just an overwhelming wealth of knowledge, and I am so excited for her to join us today. One last thing, she is also a former soccer player herself, coach, board member, and parent, so she has all been in your shoes before, and like I said, super excited for you to join us today, Ruth.
Thank you, Ben. So for those of you who haven't met Ben yet, he's with TeamGenius, and he is actually one of the first geniuses hired at TeamGenius. He's now the marketing manager for the company, and he's worked with large clubs and small clubs, clubs with a few hundred players, clubs with hundreds and thousands of coaches and referees and other members of the club. He's also worked in North America with clubs in Canada and the US, as well as clubs overseas, including one of the largest soccer clubs in Australia. So he's got experience with multiple sports in multiple places.
Well, thank you so much. Let's dive right into challenge number 1. Challenge number 1 that youth sports clubs face all the time, and I hear this constantly, our director of coaching has so much administrative work to do that he or she doesn't have enough time to work with your coaches and players. Really excited to hear what you have to say on this one, Ruth, because, I think a couple things. One, the DOC is typically a paid staff member. So from an organizational standpoint, they just assume that a lot of this administrative work falls on their shoulders. And, curious to hear your thoughts on how they should be better spending their time.
All right. So the thing to do when you're dealing with challenge number 1 is figuring out what on earth your director of coaching is doing right now. all the work that person is doing. And so I usually sit down with a big whiteboard or maybe a big piece of flip chart paper and a pile of Post-it notes. And you ask your director of coaching to write down everything he or she does. Don't make any judgments about whether they should be doing that stuff. Everything they truly do. One idea on a Post-it, and then you're going to stick it on this grid. You're going to draw this grid on your whiteboard or your piece of paper. And the left to right line, to the left of that line is work related to your sport. The stuff that you probably hired the director of coaching to do in the first place. And then on the right side of that line is administrative work, stuff that you got to do to make the thing work. And then above and below the line, you have work that your director of coaching must do. It can't be delegated. It really is part of that job. And then below the line, you have tasks that could be delegated to other coaches, to other staff members, to other volunteers. And you take that pile of Post-it notes and you put them in whichever quadrant it fits. Because at that point, you're now looking at the core work that your director of coaching must do, the stuff that's above the line. And now you've got some flexibility in, okay, how do you delegate some of the other stuff so the time is freed up so your director of coaching can focus on the priority work that you want that person to do?
No, that's great. Ruth, curious. So looking at this quadrant and, obviously some of the administrative tasks do fall on to the shoulders of your director of coaching. Looking specifically at that upper right quadrant, what are some examples of administrative work that your DOC should be focusing on and should take for themselves rather than delegate it out to other members?
I think the thing that comes to mind, top of mind for that quadrant, is hiring coaches and coming up with those job descriptions or those employment agreements to set expectations for, if you're going to coach for me and this club, this is what I expect in terms of time, in terms of coaching education, in terms of times of work, places of work, curriculum, things like that. So it's really the administrative stuff, the human resources stuff around hiring and managing a coaching staff. The administrative tasks that really don't live there are things like scheduling fields, setting up, ordering uniforms and distributing uniforms, those sorts of things you can probably get some help with.
Totally. Absolutely. Well, that's great. Let's truck on forward. Do you have anything else to add there?
I think once you've done this, then you are set up to have a discussion both with your coaching staff and with your boards of directors or your other operations staff about what is this job, what are the priorities, and where you really do need to get some help and support for your director of coaching. It's a setup for a conversation.
Well, that, and something that I think, a lot of board of directors and just groups running these organizations might struggle with, right? Like, how do you really visualize and put on paper, these 4 quadrants and what your DOC really does, what they should be doing, what to delegate. And I think this is a great framework that anyone can use and implement today. So on to challenge number 2. And I think this one's going to hit home for a lot of people too. It takes forever to make a decision or get something done, especially internally with our board of directors and committees. I think these decisions that take forever, would be the things that would fall under that umbrella would be, implementing a new tool for your coaches or staff to use, budgeting, staff, adding or subtracting decisions. Ruth, I'll give you the floor.
Right. So I have a whole workshop around this topic, and normally I would hand out paper napkins and I would have you draw this as I talked through it, because you're going to remember things if you write them down. So this is actually one of my larger flip charts. But the secret to an effective meeting, the secret that facilitators know, lives in the word why. So it's easy to remember. The W is for what, and what is all about purpose. So you've got 3 levels of purpose going on in any meeting. You've got either an organizational purpose or a project or program purpose, the big thing you're trying to accomplish, right? And then you have the reason you're meeting, the purpose of the meeting. If you can't fill in this sentence, you shouldn't be having the meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to. If you can't articulate that, think twice about having that meeting. And then you get down tactically to the agenda, right? This is your game plan. Everything on an agenda has a purpose. There's a reason for it being on there. Reasons for meetings that don't hold water. It's the first Tuesday of the month. We always meet on the first Tuesday of the month. Now, talk about purpose, the reason you're doing things. The H is how. How are you going to do those things? Now, the secret is we really only do 3 things in a meeting. We gather and share information, think status reports and updates, right? We analyze information. We figure out, what does it mean? Well, we took a survey. What are the trends? What is it telling us? Why does it matter? And then you make decisions. If you know the purpose of things on your agenda, you can match it to how are you going to go about meeting that purpose. So if it's only an update, you're gathering information. Once you have the information, you're done. If you get stuck in information gathering and your purpose is to make a decision, but all you do is gather the information and talk it to death, analyze it, you never got to the decision part, you're going to be really frustrated in that meeting. Match your purpose to what you're going to do. How are you going to do that? And when you get lost, anybody in the room can say, I thought we were going to make a decision on the budget for next year. And you, as a meeting participant, can guerrilla facilitate that meeting and help it move on, because you know what the purpose is and you know what you need to accomplish. The last part, the why, is you or who. It's the people part. Now, in the middle, they're the people in the meeting. That's kind of obvious. But there are 2 sets of people who may not be in the room, but who matter. The first are the people who are giving you input into the meeting, the people who have information to share, to provide you. And the other set is on the other end of the meeting, the people who are affected by what you're doing in that meeting, by what decisions you're making in that meeting. So when you're thinking about a meeting, it's not just the people in the room. You've got people who are giving you information. You've got people who are affected by what you're doing. So the secret in a good meeting is clear purpose, knowing how you're going to achieve that purpose, and remembering the people who give you information and who are affected by what you're doing.
That's great. Ruth, curious. I myself have never been on a board of directors for a youth sports organization, although I've worked with a ton of them. I know you have worked personally for the past 25 years with groups of this nature. Do you have a success story that sticks out to you on maybe a group that was able to implement this ultra simple why strategy in order to run and be more effective as a board of directors?
I work with a number of boards, but I can remember working, this isn't sports related, but I was working with the board of directors for a credit union, and we were doing a strategic plan. So we have all of these fairly high powered folks in the banking industry and who worked also in the fossil fuels industry, petroleum and energy sector. And there were 18 people in a room redoing the strategic plan for the bank for the year. We thought it was going to be an all-day meeting, and we choreographed out each step, what they were going to do. Supposed to run 8 to 5. We got out at 2:30, and we did everything we needed to do.
Love that. That's amazing. Awesome. I think that, and like I said earlier, just like, it's so simple, what, how, and who it affects, and just implementing this simple three-letter acronym strategy to run your board meetings more effectively. It's so easy. On to challenge number 3.
I'm going to reverse delegate this one to you, because challenge number 3 is coaches need more communication, management, and people skills. And that's about as broad as the state of Alaska, right? But your work actually provides a tool that helps address this challenge. What is it?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is something very near and dear to my heart and everyday work, kind of what we do here at TeamGenius. And I think that there's a couple things here, but really the highlights are, you guys are leaders for your youth sports organization, and you want to create a better player and parent experience to just help the overall organization and keep these kids coming back year after year, make sure they have a successful season. So how do you do that, right? Well, one of the pieces to that puzzle is this sharing feedback with the players, letting them know that they're improving or letting them know what they need to work on, and making that process easy for your coaches to first off track the information, and then giving them an easy way to share it back with the players and parents. And that's really, where TeamGenius comes in. It's a super simple mobile app where, you're essentially evaluating your team on, hey, Sarah, this is what I think you've done great this year. These are a few areas I want to see you work on. And then you're able to essentially send a report card, home with that kid. And then they're able to take that back to their parent and say, hey, this is what Coach Smith gave me today at the middle point of the season. This is what I've been doing great on. And honestly, it shows the parents that you care from an organizational level, coaches care at the team level, and you're just committed to these kids having a killer experience in their youth days playing sports. I guess, furthermore, it does help keep your coaches and players around year to year, which is a huge thing. You want those kids coming back. And really, like I said at the outset, it's just creating that positive experience for the kids. Certainly, like you said, this issue is as big as the state of Alaska. But if there's any way where, during the season you can start to help, I think that's a great launching point for a lot of these youth organizations. Ruth, anything that you've experienced with your background that you think could help or you have to add?
I think I have a whole soapbox on this, but I think one of the keys I think one of the keys to engaging parents is that communication piece. Clubs who have good communication, whether it's sharing player improvement or player development, or just basic stuff like, how do you get to the field? The better your communication is, the fewer headaches you have with parents. It's a straight line. And so anything you can do to make that work better is going to improve everybody's experience and retention, whether it's coaches, parents, or players. That's really the name of the game. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great segue into our next challenge. Is that, our team managers and coaches are overwhelmed with administrivia and emails and phone calls. I think really the key here is that these team managers and coaches, by and large, they're volunteers. And I know we talk about, communication is key and things like that, but how it's a problem, right? We don't want to put too much on our volunteer coaches. How do you do that from an organizational standpoint effectively?
Right. So first of all, I'm going to give you a statistic, right? One statistic. The literature in volunteer management for since I was a little girl and my mother was doing this, is if you're asking people to volunteer more than an average of 10 hours a week, you're setting yourself up for burnout and turnover. More than 10 hours a week, you're in the danger zone. So I am not only a recovering soccer mom, I am now a soccer grandmother. And yeah, he's 5 and he's playing soccer. And the team manager job is like, you know, the secret superhero. And years ago, my first team manager job, the coach came up and he said, "You can't do this all yourself." He said, "How many kids are on our roster?" I said, 15. He said, "Okay, we're going to list out all the work that you and I have to do as a coach and a team manager, and we're magically going to make it be 15 jobs, one for each family on the team," because his son and my son both played. He says, "You and I are going to take the big ones." But then we have 13 jobs and we can offer them to everybody on the team, and everybody's going to have skin in the game. Everybody's going to contribute. Big stuff and little stuff. And we divided things up in 3 areas to make it even less onerous, less scary, right? So imagine that your team setup volunteers are people who do things like help people register, order uniforms, order player cards, set up initial rosters. There's a whole bunch of busy stuff that happens at the front end of a season that doesn't happen week to week and, you know, throughout the season. Team setup. Got some volunteers who want to jump in and get it done. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got game day, your competitions. You've got things like equipment. Who's bringing the game ball? Who's bringing the first aid kit? Who's going to report the scores? Those game day things, perfect for families who never miss a game. If they are already all in and they're not missing a game, asking them to bring the first aid kit is an easy yes. And then you have team operations in the middle. That's more week to week, not quite day to day. Things like where's practice this week? What are the directions to the game on Saturday? What color jersey are we wearing? Those sorts of things. But when we divided up all the work by all the people, not only did it relieve my workload as a team manager, it also made everybody part of the in crowd, right? We became the off-field team, and the adults became as much of a team supporting the team as the kids on the field. And we had a lot fewer problems because we all were in the in crowd. We all knew a piece of what it took amongst all of these adults to create a good experience for our kids. And as parents, that's what we want. We want a good experience for our kids.
Absolutely. Ruth, question. So you were able to divvy up those 15 different jobs, give one to each parent, creating that off the field team. Curious, how many times did you have to deal with parent conflict during that season?
On that,
I think I already know the answer. Yeah.
Maybe once.
I
don't remember.
I would imagine.
No,
Yeah,
that team did not have a lot of fussiness.
That's good. Well, and I would imagine, right, when you're building this cohesiveness with the parents, it greatly reduces the burden of, you know, the upset parent, because not as much because they're super upset that their kid's not playing. It's more, you know, they get to know the coaches, they get to know the team managers on a personal level. And I would imagine that it reduces that friction that can sometimes happen, and we hear the stories about all too often in youth sports.
Well, actually, I will give you one more data point with that team. It was a great team. The first year I was a team manager for that team, they did not win a game all season. They tied one, lost every other game. No fussing on the parents' side. We had a couple of kids leave at the end of the season. I think 12 or 13 of the kids returned the next season, and this team had not won a game. The second season, they won their bracket. They went from the Bad News Bears to having it together, and they were 12, 13.
Yeah,
So we created an off-field team that did not abandon ship in the face of a whole lot of losses.
that's great. That is a great success story. Let's move on to challenge number 5. We must recruit and train new volunteers over and over because we have such high turnover. This one is a headache from an admin side. You know, you have your president that hopefully doesn't leave every year, but you know, those people underneath them, and it's the age-old problem. How do you get these volunteers energized, excited enough about what you're doing at your youth sports organization, stick around for more than just 1 year?
One of the UPSL teams I work with has teased me about, now your motto really is go slow to go fast. And I think about when I'm coaching coaches or organizations that there's a lot to that. And the steps in a successful volunteer program are in fact go slow to go fast. Because if you look at this list of 5, the first 3 are all about work you do beforehand. You don't get to the volunteers actually doing work until step 4. And you think, wow, that feels kind of administratively heavy, right? But the steps, the first step is figuring out, knowing what you want. What's paid staff going to do? What's the coach going to do? What do you want volunteers to do? And it's not just, all y'all show up and we'll figure it out. I mean, be really specific. So Ben, if I'm running a tournament and I say, hey, would you help me out with this tournament on Saturday and Sunday? You might say yes. I mean, if you like me, you might say yes. But if I say, hey, Ben, I'm running this tournament on this weekend, and I really need help checking teams in at the registration desk from 8 till 10 o'clock on Saturday. Would you help me out? Now, which one are you inclined to say yes to?
Much more inclined to the more straightforward ask when I know what I'm signing up for versus the other.
Right. So if I'm going to have a successful ask, I not only need to know I need a volunteer, but I need to know, what is that job? How big is it? What's the time commitment? You know, what am I really asking you to do? And I have to know that you've got the skills to actually do that job. The other thing I need to do is prepare and train you. So thinking about, what do you need to do that job? So say one of the other jobs at my tournament is picking up trash. I have 24 fields. I've done this. I have 24 fields. I have garbage cans all over. I have a couple of dumpsters at the far end. And you said you'll help me pick up trash for 2 hours. But I still need to tell you where the garbage cans are, where the dumpster is, where the garbage bags are, right? You need training. It may only take me 5 minutes to train you, but you can't show up and just magically figure it out. So you're talking about 3 parts of preparation. 1, 2, 3, know what you want, make the ask, make sure people are prepared, and then you get your stuff done, right? Then you go out, you do your volunteer stuff, it's successful, you know where the garbage bags are, it's great. The 5th part matters. You've got to say thank you. You've got to let people know you appreciate that they've taken time away from the 101 other things they could have been doing to be there for you and your program and your event. Don't forget that part.
Absolutely. So simple, but so easy to forget, and it's so easy to do on the flip side. Just say thank you. Anything else there, Ruth, before we go on to challenge number 6?
Well, I can tell you, I've run some fairly large volunteer programs. I did, in fact, run a tournament where every family in the club was supposed to donate 6 hours to the tournament. You can imagine how the people felt who had more than one child in the club, or even the single parents, right? We had a voluntary participation rate of almost 90% of people who said, if you tell me specifically what you want, when you want it, and make it easy for me, I'll be there. Then I also had a category called floating staff, in case somebody didn't show up. So we really were operating at about 97% of filling all the jobs at my tournament. The other thing I had done was with a semi-pro team years ago, after one of our local teams folded. So it's a semi-pro team, men's team. We had 5 paid staff, 2 coaches and 3 administrators, 3 operations people. My job was the volunteer program and running the stadium. I ran the stadium. It's about a high school size stadium, 2 sides, 88 volunteers and me. Total stadium staff, from hauling the teams around, all field operations, tickets, merchandise, concessions, the whole bit. 88 people and me. We had a 98% return rate, which meant 1, 2, and 3 on this list became easier in year 2 and year 3 because we'd already figured out what the jobs were. We defined the jobs. We knew what we had to train people on. And when 98% of your folks come back, it makes that easier and easier over time. It makes it more sustainable, makes it more fun. And then people say, hey, I want to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Those success stories. So just to recap that there, make it very clear and distinct what you want your volunteers to do, what the job is that you need them to do. Prepare and train them when they show up. They're going to show up. They're going to get everything done. And if you say thank you, this really isn't a 1 through 5. This is more of I think about this as more of a cyclical wheel, right? They can go right back to the top the next year, and it gets easier the next time they go through it because you're retaining these volunteers. You don't have to train them as much. They show up, they already know what to do. And that, I think, is essentially the definition of a sustainable program. That's awesome. On to number 6. Oh, man. We need sponsor, fundraising, and grant dollars so that we can afford to run our club and do not have to charge so much for kids to play. Wow, this is a loaded challenge because at the end of the day, in order to run an effective club, you need money. There's a variety of different ways to get it from, but I know this is probably one that stresses out our leaders in youth sports more than any.
Right. So the trick here is to step back and think about the revenue sources you might have for your club, and that they're different and their expectations are different depending on where your money's coming from. So if you're charging fees and parents are paying for their children to play, that's pretty straightforward. And you need to have a good accounting system to keep track of that, right? If you're asking for donations, just because people love what you're doing, they want to support you, usually those don't come with a lot of strings, although sometimes people will donate specifically. I want my money to go to the new field. I want my money to go to a scholarship fund. So sometimes they do have a tag on them for a specific purpose. If you're fundraising, those still are pretty much free will, but you may be running a concession stand where people are purchasing things. You may be selling fruit or other goods that you get a percentage off of those sales. You want to keep track of those monies in this accounting system, because if at the end of the season you have extra money, hopefully you have spent your donation money and your fundraising money first, because it's perfectly acceptable to refund fees to parents. Oh my gosh, we charged you $500. It only cost us $400 to run the program. We can give everybody money back. That's okay. But if you have donation money or fundraising money, you typically cannot refund that money back to parents. Because it's illogical to fundraise so that we could just pay our parents off, right? So make sure you've got a good accounting system and you don't end up in a place where you're refunding the wrong money. The local folks who keep track of accounting will get really unhappy with you. The last 2, sponsorships and grants, have really special kinds of expectations. Sponsorships are a business relationship. They are not a donation. Now, it may be that the local restaurant or the local sporting goods store really loves your program, and maybe their kids are in your program. But a sponsorship thing is where I have something that's going to benefit you and you have something to benefit me. I have people who love to eat Italian food and you have an Italian restaurant. And I can say, hey, I can highlight your restaurant and encourage my people to come to your business, and your sponsorship of us. Maybe we put your name on a jersey, or you help sponsor. You buy all our soccer balls for our 10-year-old teams. That is a business relationship. That's not a donation, and it needs to be treated with that kind of respect. The last one, grants. People who give grants are trying to accomplish certain kinds of objectives. They might be increased health and fitness for young people. They might be access to sporting programs for people in low-income communities. But grants typically have a purpose, and when someone gives you grant money, one, you've got to usually write a proposal and say, this is how we're going to use your money. But you also need to be accountable for the results. Did you really increase access for children in a low-income community? Did you really help those children have better health and fitness? So different kinds of money, different kinds of expectations. Make sure you have a good accounting system, because you don't want to mix these up in ways that will get either your state or the federal government unhappy with your bookkeeping.
Totally. I think it's great to lay it out like this and separate. Oftentimes people that are on these board of directors, I mean, they're just a parent, right, that wants to donate some of their time back to the association that their kid is a part of. And so, breaking it down, sponsorships, business relationship, give and take, donations, more of a give from someone else, fundraising, like you said, and then grants, funds for a specific purpose, and then fees are really the money in that your parents are paying. That's great. On to our seventh and final challenge, and I feel like we almost need a drum roll here, because this one's big, and I have quite seriously heard members of the board quit their job mid-season because this little tiny part of it, and I shouldn't even say little tiny because it is so big and so important, it drives people nuts. So conflicts between coaches, parents, board members, administration, driving good people away. Ruth, you've been on every single side of this. You've been the parent, you've been the coach, you've been the board member, you've been the administrator. I can't wait to hear what wisdom you have on this challenge, which I think is in fact deadly.
Yeah, it is. And actually, I'm a trained mediator, so that just makes my head explode. But the secret behind what a mediator does is asking questions. And the first question you ask as a mediator, as people are telling their stories of why they're unhappy and what happened, is to separate interests from positions, okay? And I'm going to tell you a real quick story about how do you tell the difference between an interest and a position. They sound kind of the same, but it's all about an orange, okay? Orange, when you forget, it's orange. Because years ago, I used to teach conflict resolution to third graders at the elementary school across from where I live, across the street. And I would go in and I would take my orange and we would do a skit. And I'd pull out my orange and there'd be a class of kids. I say, hey, I've got an orange. Who wants the orange? And two kids, not one, but two kids would say, I want the orange. I said, oh man, I only brought one orange. What should I do now? And what do you think those kids told me to do with this one orange?
I bet they said, what? Cut it in half?
Cut it in half. That's exactly what they said. They're really smart third graders. Except that the two kids in my skit didn't like that idea. They didn't want to cut the orange in half. They were really opposed to cutting the orange in half. And so I let it be quiet. And I said, okay, kids, what are we going to do now? They don't like that solution. And I let it be quiet. And they squirmed and they squirmed and they squirmed because they were third graders. And somebody finally says, why do they want the orange? Okay, we'll ask. So I asked the little girl, why would you like the orange? And she says, I'm really hungry. I want to eat the orange. I don't want to eat half the orange. I want to eat all the orange. Oh, well, okay, if you're hungry, that makes sense. And I turn to the little boy and I say, why would you like the orange? And he says, it's my mom's birthday. And she loves orange cake. And I need the zest of the orange to make the special frosting on my mother's birthday cake. And all of a sudden, the light bulb goes on, right? Because the position is, I want the orange. The positions are in conflict, but the interests are not in conflict. I can make both of them happy. And the little girl gets to eat all the orange and the little boy gets to make his cake. Now, not all conflicts are as easy as an orange. But the thing about asking the question, why is this important to you? Help me understand, moves you from headbutting positions to, oh, well, are there other ways to help solve this problem? Case in point, the conversation coaches really don't like. Hey, coach, I want more playing time. Yeah, love that conversation, right? And you've only got how many kids on the court, how many kids on the ice at one time, right? And you need substitutes on the bench because you wouldn't go into a game without a substitute or 3 or 4. But ask that player, help me understand why more playing time is important to you. And you might get a variety of different things. I want to be a better goalkeeper. I want to make sure that coach at that university sees me because I want to play for that coach. I want that coach to see how well I play. Or it might just be, I want some status, at my school that, I get to play a lot. Or it might be, I want to feel like I'm really contributing to this team. Those are 4 very different reasons to want playing time. And once a coach knows, the coach also has multiple ways to help with those needs in addition to the playing time issue. So there's a playing time solution and there's some other solutions that can help that player meet those needs. So the why question, back to why again, right? The why question opens up the conversation so you can look for other ways to solve the problem rather than positions headbutting.
Yeah, makes total sense. That's great. Awesome. So real quickly, before we move ahead to kind of our final point, Janine, thank you so much for submitting a question over chat. And it actually relates to challenge number 6. And Ruth, I think you will have a couple things on this, but Janine is wondering what kind of grants are available typically for a youth football organization. And just, she'd really love to look into this as an option to help raise some money for their youth football association. So I'll throw it back to you. What kind of grants are typically available for youth sports organizations from a state level, from a city level, from a national level? And I'm curious to hear what you have to say on this too.
So the thing about grants is figuring out what you would like to use a grant for. So do you need to build fields? Do you need to have scholarship money for kids? Do you need to start up a specific new kind of program? Do you have, a health and safety program? So being creative with what could you use money for, because grants will come for specific things. Sometimes your national governing bodies will have specific types of grants for specific programs. You'll have corporations like Target that has a grant program for sporting organizations. You have foundations that help with building facilities, sport courts, and things like that. You have other granting organizations who actually aren't in the sporting world. They might be in the health world. The statistics on when children leave sports, it used to be around age 12 or 13. It's now dropped down to age 10 and 11, where kids are dropping out of sport at huge numbers. So, in the health and fitness arena, looking for places that may not have sport in their name, but may have health in their name. And there are, you can send Ben and I an email. There are lists and lists and lists of granting organizations. It's, in some ways, once you get into the space, the list is so long, you sort of have to focus because it can be a little overwhelming. But targeting specific kinds of needs, and that will help your search be more fruitful.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And Janine, yeah, feel free. We'll have our contact info here at the end, but would love to follow up with you on that one and just offer any additional help. So on to our last item here, the critical balance in successful youth sports. Ruth, you have an awesome 3 legs of a bar stool example here, and would love to hear about it.
Right. So all our work at Go is really rooted in this concept, which actually comes from Bobby Howe, who used to be the coaching director for U.S. Soccer. And if you imagine a 3-legged stool and it's got an athlete on it, a child athlete on it, and one of the legs is your coaching, quality coaching and supporting that coaching. It's not in a vacuum. The other leg is governance and leadership. Think board of directors or club owners. And the third leg is operations and administration. It's that day-to-day stuff to keep the club running. Now, you said GO stands for governance and operations. So I tend to focus on number 2 and number 3. That's my wheelhouse. But if those 3 legs aren't in balance, your player falls off the stool, right? The stool falls over. Governance and operations exist to support players, teams, and coaches. Okay? They're equal in importance. They may not be equal in size or staffing or budget, but they are equal in importance, and it's all about supporting players, teams, and coaches. The way you do that, and you've heard me say this, it's all about the off-field team. It's about the roles that we as adults play to make sure that our kids have a good sporting experience. So it's not about pitting coaches against parents or board members against coaches. That's not the gig. We're all on the same team. We just need to play the position on our team that contributes to that team's success. I was a goalkeeper for 40 years, and you don't need 11 goalkeepers on a soccer team to win a game. In fact, it could be a really interesting game if it were 11 goalkeepers, right? But you need a couple. You need a couple of good ones, right? Think of that. You don't need, a ton of board members. You need the right board members doing the right thing to help with the policies and the finances and the human resources element. You need the right number of people in operations so that you have court space and ice time and field rentals so that your kids have a place to play. And you need coaches who want to learn, who know how to work with kids. You need to support them in the equipment they need, the education they need, the support they need so they can concentrate on giving the kids a good experience. That's the off-field team. And when you've really got a team off-field, you don't have as many problems because you realize I have my bit on the team, and that's really important to the success of this club.
That's great. So awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Ruth, let's you do a quick recap here before we get to our final slide of just kind of summarizing what we learned today and what we can take back to help make our youth sports clubs better.
Right. So the idea is to minimize and make these things less deadly and less of a challenge. so that your director of coaching has less administrative work so that she can have more time to work with your coaches and players. That your board of directors, your committees can make a decision and get stuff done in a shorter amount of time and with less frustration. So that your coaches are better at managing player development, managing how they measure that, managing how they communicate with players and parents so that everyone has a clear expectations and that that fun in the sport can continue. That your team managers and coaches, that they know how to share the workload so that parents are engaged and supportive of each other and you get a good off-field team so your team managers and coaches aren't overwhelmed with administrivia. That you have a great volunteer program because you know what you need, you communicate what you need, and you're grateful for the people who give you time and energy and help your culture in your club be that positive thing that really is the antidote to awful parent behavior. That you have the adequate funding, right? You have enough money, so your fees aren't so high. So that pay-to-play model that we all complain about is less onerous. And that you've got great sponsors, great business relationships, and those grant dollars, you're nailing the goals for those grants to make a difference in your community. And people want to give to your programs. They want to support you with their time and their money. And lastly, when you have a conflict, you know the questions to ask, you know to listen, not to respond, but listen to understand and look for solutions that aren't just butting positions, aren't just headbutting because we both wanted the orange. What happens if we both can have more of the orange than we thought possible?
That's fantastic. Well, thank you everyone so much for tuning in. If you guys do have any follow-up questions on the content here, feel free to shoot Ruth or myself an email. Again, that's website URLs, and I will make sure to include a link to the slide deck in the email you guys all receive. Again, just want to say thank you so much. Ruth, do you have anything as we sign off here?
I think figuring out what your superpower is, how you're going to contribute to your club. And it's okay if your superpower is different than others. Just remember, you're all on the same team. Find the best position to play and have fun doing it.
Well said. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.